Hey folks, welcome to Black Gumbo Southern Gardening. Are you totally new at planting tomatoes in pots? Let's learn how. So this video is a little bit different than my usual gardening videos. This is kind of a video shamelessly tailored to new gardeners and folks who maybe are walking through the Home Depot and spot some tomatoes and look outside and say, wow, it's spring, let's grow some tomato plants. Perhaps that's you and you don't have a garden, or you don't have a big garden. Maybe you don't have a lot of experience gardening. Maybe you just want to try it. Maybe you have no space. You live in an apartment, you have a balcony, and you want to grow some tomatoes in a container. How do you do that? Well, I'm going to show you today how I do it, because I grow tomatoes in the ground. I also grow tomatoes in containers, but you know, tomatoes are the most popular vegetable fruit in the whole United States. It's popular worldwide. And man, I've got tons of tomato varieties growing today, and I've got a special one that I'm going to pot up today, and I'll show you how. So let's go to the store and I'll show you how to select some good tomatoes. When you're buying these plants at the store, usually you're going to find like Bonnie Plants or a couple other companies, and Bonnie does pretty good with their plants. The downside is you only get a couple of varieties to choose from. This is my local feed store, and they've got some of these larger sizes. You could buy these larger sizes, but if you really want to, but I like to buy them when they're about this size. These are peppers. They don't have any small size, but you'll find tomato plants at the grocery store and Home Depot, places like that, in these smaller containers, and that's what I like to buy. Just buy a plant that looks nice and healthy. Now there's two plants in here. You could actually divide these out if you wanted to. So that's a benefit of buying one of these pots that got two plants, and tomatoes divide really well. That means you just take them and carefully separate their roots and plant them in separate containers. There's one, looks like it's got 3 plants in it. All right, here we are at the Home Depot. They've got these plants in the smaller containers, and that's what I like. I like a plant about that large. That's the perfect size, actually. You can see it's got a little flower there. These hybrids and the types that the companies grow tend to be very eager producers, because that's what people want. So what I would do to plant this, see, it's got these stressed leaves. You want to just knock that leaf off, pinch that branch off, and you can pinch all those branches off and plant it all the way up to there where my fingers are. So you don't have to really worry about a tomato plant that has yellow leaves on it like this. You can just pinch those off. What you want to look for is the top portion, the uppermost part of the tomato. Does it look healthy? Is it green? This is not healthy right here, although you could pinch that off too, but I'd select another plant. This plant's got blossoms on it. I'd probably pass on that and get one that doesn't have blossoms on it. Down here, most of these are starting to blossom. And see back here, some of these plants are pretty stressed out. Most of this kind of stress is just simply because they're too large for their pot. That little pot there, that's tiny. Your root system needs to have about as much room as your plant has at any given time. So I would not hesitate to buy something like these smaller ones. That's what you want to look for in a tomato. Again, when checking plants at a store like this, you want to look on the underside of all the leaves and make sure you're not bringing home pests and insect eggs. Sometimes these get insects underneath them. I've actually seen caterpillar eggs underneath plants at the store. So you want to check your plant and make sure you get a healthy plant, and also one that's not bringing home diseases to your garden. And once you do that, you're ready to go. Most of these hybrids are designed to be disease resistant. They're designed to be heavy producers. You want to look on the label though. Before you go home, make sure that you know whether your plant is a determinate plant or an indeterminate. Here's two side by side. This is an indeterminate plant, this Cherokee Purple. This is a determinate plant, and you treat them very different. Determinate plants you don't prune, and you usually don't need to stake. They're often called bush types. But an indeterminate plant is going to keep growing, and you'll have to prune that, trellis it, or cage it, while a determinate plant will grow to a certain height, stop, and put its fruit out, usually all at once. So make sure that you look on the label and take note of what you're buying, because that's a big deal. That's like intermediate tomato growing 101. Okay, when buying your potting soil, just buy your basic potting mix. You want to make sure you get potting mix that says on there it's for potting. You don't want to get raised bed mix, topsoil, or anything like that. You don't want garden soil. All that's too dense. You want to get a potting mix, and That's the one I like because it's cheap. And you don't need all the fancy name brands. But if you want to get that, go for it. But get you a couple of bags of this to fill your pot. For containers, you want to buy something that's large enough for your root system. I'll speak about containers in a moment, but for my plant, I'm going to buy one of these 20-gallon pots. You can get something as small as 5 gallons. I suggest 10 gallons, but I'm going all the way with 20. So we'll talk about pots in just a moment. All right, so that's how you shop for tomato plants. Let's go back to the garden. First thing you're going to need is some space, some place to grow. Tomatoes need full sun. Most tomatoes need full sun. If you're going to grow a large, you want a big, mortgage lifter or a big full-size tomato, you've got to make sure you have full sun. So if you just live in an apartment where you get 3 or 4 hours of sun a day, you shouldn't select a full-size tomato. Some of the smaller cherry tomatoes or the little dwarf plants, those can tolerate maybe 4 hours of sun. 6 is better. So if you've only got a half day of sun, grow the smaller type tomatoes. So that's what you need. First, you got to have a place to grow them. And you don't have to have a large place. I'm on a 1/4 acre lot. I have a small garden in my backyard, but I put pots all over the place. Second, you're going to need a pot. And the thing with tomatoes is they grow a lot of roots. They're heavy feeders. They need a lot of space to spread out their roots. And so at Home Depot, they sell all these different kind of cheap pots. Those are perfect. Or you can get a 5-gallon bucket. I've grown in these buckets back here. I've grown tomatoes for years. I don't recommend a 5-gallon bucket if you're just beginning. You probably want to get something larger. The minimum I would go is 10 gallons. On the plant that I'm going to plant today, it's kind of a special plant. I'll talk about that in a little bit. I'm going with 20 gallons because I really want that plant to perform well. It's part of my single seed challenge, and I really want it to do well, so I'm going to give it a lot of room, 20 gallons. But you can buy a 10-gallon pot. 10-gallon pot is sufficient. Craig LaHoulier wrote this epic tomatoes book. Craig is one of the experts in breeding tomatoes, and this guy knows everything there is to know about tomatoes. And he suggests 10 gallon as a minimum as well. So I'll go with him. I've done 5 gallon. You can get away with a 5-gallon bucket, but I don't recommend it for just starting out. I've chosen this 20-gallon pot for my tomatoes. It's a new pot. You can use a recycled pot, or you can use a free nursery pot. I know my gardener suggests you go find some nursery pots, and that's a good deal. He says that when it cracks in the sun after 3 seasons, you're not losing your investment. Your heart doesn't break. That's true. So I'm going to grow this in this one though. If you're using a recycled pot, make sure you wash it out and clean it out. Some folks even suggest you sterilize it, especially if you grew the same kind of crop in it the previous season. But if you're totally new at this, you probably got a new pot and it's perfectly clean. You don't have to worry about it. Timing. There's the question of timing. If you're new to this, you probably saw tomato plants at the store and picked them up. And if they're in the store, it's the right time to plant. But generally, you want to put tomatoes outdoors when the weather is free from frost. You want to have the ideal temperature seems to be between 65 and 85 degrees. When it gets hotter than 90 degrees, your tomato's not going to set fruit very well. It's going to drop its blossoms and it's going to be really stressed out. Tomato plants prefer a little bit milder weather. So as soon as winter's over and it starts looking like spring and there's no frost, that's a good time to plant tomatoes. The next thing you're going to need is some sort of a soil. If you're just beginning, just go buy you a bag of potting mix. That's all you need. You want to make sure that you get enough soil to fill your pot. One of these bags will fill a 5-gallon bucket and give you a little extra. But if you're doing 10 gallons or more, I get 2 or 3 bags of this stuff. Make sure it's a potting mix. You can buy the name brand stuff. You can buy this Kellogg's brand. I like this stuff. I use it a lot. It's the cheapest stuff you can get. Now, I've already mixed up my soil. I'm using a recycled mix, and I'm refreshing my soil with some fertilizer. And I'll talk about fertilizer in a moment. Fertilizer is very important for your tomato plants. But if you just bought your bagged potting soil, just dump it right in there. One thing I like to do when filling a pot is to leave a few inches at the top to put mulch in. You want to mulch a tomato plant, and you can use a variety of mulches. I'll talk about what I'm going to use in a moment, but just leave a little bit of space. Now, tomatoes are very heavy feeders, and so you want to add some fertilizer to your soil before you even start planting. And a lot of people will say just put in a balanced fertilizer, a 10-10-10, and mix about a handful or a cup of that in here. Mix it in near the top, you know, not way down at the bottom. You want it near the top 6 inches or so. Now, you don't have to worry if you're totally new to this. Just get you a basic fertilizer that's that has all the numbers even. You'll notice on all fertilizers there's 3 numbers. That's nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, NPK, and that's just tells you what's in the fertilizer. And you want something that's fairly balanced. Although if you want to really get advanced at your tomato planting, then you want to go with something that the ratio is 1:4:2, and that higher middle number is what you're looking for. That really helps the plants to set fruit and set blossoms. So yeah, but I'm just going to use this Dr. Earth organic natural fertilizer, and I'm going to take a good handful, about a cup, and I'm going to mix it into the soil. Then I'm going to take about a half a cup of garden lime. What garden lime will do is provide a means for your tomato plant to have calcium available to it. And calcium is very important for tomatoes. Otherwise you can get, well, calcium's related to blossom end rot. Blossom end rot means that you've had some watering issues and that your plant was unable to take up the calcium it needed. Even if the calcium's in the soil, you got to water your plants regularly. So I've already amended this soil actually, and it's got about a handful of that Dr. Earth in here, about a good cupful, and it's got about a fourth of a cup, maybe a little more of that garden lime, and I've mixed it in really well. So that's all you really need to get going. If you're just starting out, that's the basic simple stuff. All right, let's put a plant in here. Now, if you bought your plant at the store, you probably got something similar to this in size. This I started from seed. In fact, this is called a Black Beauty tomato. It is my single seed challenge. If you're interested in single seed challenge, just follow the hashtag that's in the description, or I'll link it up here in the video. But this is a Black Beauty tomato, and I have nurtured this from a single seed and have watched it grow to this size. I'm going to put it in this pot in 20 gallons of soil so that it can really grow well. This is going to be a real nice tomato. So all we're going to do is make a hole in the middle. Some folks recommend that you pre-moisten your soil. I don't do that. I haven't noticed that it makes much difference to the plant. And then you just take your plant, kind of squeeze it around. Now, on a plant like this that's tall, they call that leggy, and you want your tomato plant to be nice and strong and sturdy, but a leggy plant can sometimes flop over. This one's pretty sturdy, but I'm going to pinch off that lower leaf, and I'm going to pinch off this lower branch. Just pinch them off, doesn't hurt the plant. And you'll notice all along this tomato, these hairs, all of those hairs have the potential to become a root. So I'm going to plant this pretty deep. So you just take your plant, and I like to put it between my fingers and turn the whole thing over. And there we get a look at the root system. If your roots are all bound up and circling in here, you want to loosen them up a little bit. And just drop it right in the hole there. And you want to firm up your soil around your plant. Don't worry, you're not going to hurt it. And make sure you label so you know what's what. We now have planted a little tomato plant. All right, what's the next step? Are we done? I'm going to put some mulch on here. Mulch will keep weeds from growing in here, suppress the weeds. Mulch will also help retain moisture in the soil. And mulch is just a good insulator as well, help keep the temperature from fluctuating as much as it would if you just had bare soil. Bare soil is never found in nature for long. Something's going to move in, and you want that soil to be covered. So I'm using rice hulls. Rice hulls are a byproduct of the rice industry. You could use hardwood mulch, you could use leaf mulch, you could use anything you want that is compatible with vegetables. Just get a hardwood mulch, that's fine, and pack it in about 1 inch to 2 inches deep in here. Right now, since my plant's so young, I'm just going to put about 1 inch of it on there. Mulch is never a bad idea. If you're new to gardening, let me say it again, mulch is very, very helpful, and you can't go wrong. You want to always water in a fresh transplant really well. Get that soil nice and moist. In a pot this large, those roots will take several weeks to get down to the bottom, so it dries out on the top a lot quicker, even with the mulch. So you want to come out and make sure that your soil is moist. Just stick your finger down in there, and if it feels damp, just slightly damp, you're good. But if it doesn't feel damp, if it's kind of dry, you need to water. On average, you water maybe twice a week when the weather's nice, maybe 3 times a week. Don't water any more than that, you'll strain your plant. In the hot weather, when it gets up into the 90s, I find that I have to water my plants every single day, and sometimes twice a day. Hopefully this plant will produce into the summer, and we'll keep it nicely watered, but I need to water it in now. Pardon my crazy corgi. If you're new to my channel, my dog protects me from the hose, and sometimes she's a little crazy. No. So there's our plant, and if you're following the single seed challenge, that's the final resting spot of this tomato. This plant will grow now and put on fruit right here in this pot. I may move it around on my decks here a little bit, but I want to talk about other kinds of pots. These pots right here are plastic, but I've also got this cloth pot. Sometimes they call these smart pots. I think that's a brand name, but they're just cloth bags. There's a benefit to these. Cloth pots are beneficial. They keep your plants from getting all root bound and keep the circling down by a process called root pruning. Or air pruning, and I'll link you to my video on these cloth pots if you want to grow that. You can see over there I've also got some tomatoes growing in cloth pots. Now these are micro varieties, and that's why they're in small pots. These plants will maybe top out about 1 foot, maybe 2 feet tall, so I can grow those in the smaller pots. But this is the final resting place for my my Black Beauty there. This is going to be a wonderful tomato. I can't wait. Okay, so now our tomato is planted. What do you do next? Do you just let it grow? Yeah, just enjoy watching it grow. When it rains or when you water that plant, it's going to be more prone to wash the fertilizer and the nutrition out of that soil right out through the holes in the bottom, especially all that water-soluble fertilizer that your plant needs. So with plants in containers, you fertilize them more often, more frequently than you do the plants in the ground. And so I suggest you fertilize with a balanced basic fertilizer. I dare say Miracle Grow, but if you use chemicals, that's fine. The chemicals are chemicals. I mean, they're all molecules. You can use an organic fertilizer if you prefer, and you can use fertilizer that's specifically made for tomatoes, and just do that once every 3 weeks. Follow the directions on the packet, fertilize your plant once every 3 weeks, and in about 90 days you'll be eating some nice tomatoes. How long do tomatoes take to fruit? Well, it depends on the variety. Some of them put on fruit really quick. As you saw at the store, some of those varieties, those aren't any more than 1.5 months old, and they're already starting to fruit at, say, 40 days. But generally, your tomatoes are going to take you 75 to 100 days to mature. And there's 2 different kinds of tomatoes. You want to watch out for that. At the store, we looked at that, and I spoke briefly about the indeterminates versus the determinates. If you have a small space, grow a determinate variety, a bush variety. They call them determinates because they have a determined amount of growth, a predetermined amount of growth, and they grow up to a certain size and then they stop growing. So those are often very stocky, dense, tree-like tomato plants. You don't have to prune them. That's the perfect beginner tomato, is a determinate plant that's a bush variety. It grows. You don't have to prune it. You don't have to do anything but fertilize and water it. If you want a little more of a challenge, an indeterminate type is a vining type, and they grow and they grow, and you got to keep on top of them. You got to thin them out. You got to prune them. Man, I've seen some of those indeterminate types get 25 feet tall if they're trellised up a telephone pole or something. But yeah, indeterminate, you actually have to prune, and you got to learn how to do that the right way. So keep on watching my channel, and we'll prune these tomatoes up as they grow this season. And it's not hard. It just takes a little bit of know-how. So hey, thanks. You should be on your way to growing tomatoes now. It's not hard. Gardening's easy. Anybody can do it, and you can do it too. So thanks for joining me on Black Gumbo Southern Gardening. I hope your tomato plants and containers do well for you. I hope that you enjoy gardening and really decide to get into it even more. Hey, subscribe to our channel, like us on Instagram and Facebook, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.